and they found that if we go early with support, if we use appropriate intervention just before a child goes to school or immediately in the first grade, that after appropriate intervention we have activation regions that they didn't activated usually in dyslexic person. We can see here that left and right brain, that they have different functions, and usually in children with dyslexia, they usually use right brain, and that's why they switch, and usually it's explanation that's why they have problem with reading. How it looks like, you can see what's happened when somebody use right brain. They see everything in pictures, and if you use left brain, they use letters and they use sounds, and that's the problem with the dyslexia, that we have to activate it, regions that they are usually not activated, and we have to teach them how to use not only pictures, how to use phonemes, how to use sounds. What is problem with dyslexia? Because all around the world there are a lot of myths about dyslexia, because awareness about dyslexia still is not enough. What is really dyslexia? That's why I started with definition of dyslexia. There are a lot of myths that dyslexia is visual problems, because they reverse letters, usually B and D, but it is not sufficient cause of signs for dyslexia diagnosis. Why? Because most children, by learning how to read, may reverse letters and eventually grow out of it. Also, another myth is that dyslexia affects only boys, but dyslexia is prevalent in both boys and girls. The reasons boys get the most referrals is because of their behavior. In expressing frustration regarding reading difficulty, the teachers notice and make referrals. The other myth is that poor performance equals dyslexia. Dyslexia as learning difficulty does not imply intellectual disability. In fact, most students with dyslexia may have an average or above average intelligence. Why is it important? Because we have different approaches depending on intelligence or some person. Dyslexia cannot read. Children with dyslexia may find it difficult to read, but they can learn to read, in which case it takes them greater effort and more time to read. The other myth is that dyslexia can be outgrown, but dyslexia is difficulty that stems from impairment in brain functioning, and dyslexia children with dyslexia grow on to become adults who read less automatically like those without dyslexia. The other myth is that dyslexia is caused by lack of phonic instruction. Teaching a child phonics will not elevate dyslexia. While they are able to learn phonics, they experience difficulties applying them. The seventh myth is that every child who struggles with reading is dyslexic. Not true. Dyslexia is the most common cause of difficulty with reading, but it is by no means the only cause. The next myth is that people with dyslexia see things backwards, and on the internet you will find a lot of disinformation examples, but children with dyslexia do not see things backwards because dyslexia is not a problem with eyes. And the last myth is that children with dyslexia are just lazy. They should try harder, and parents, teachers usually make mistakes when think that this myth is true. because research has shown that those with dyslexia use a different part of the brain when reading and working with language. And they can try, and they really tried to overcome their difficulties, but with traditional methods, they can't do that. They can work very hard, but if they use traditional methods, they can't overcome their difficulties. Therefore, it is very important to find appropriate approaches, to find appropriate methods for them, and then in that cases, only they can overcome their difficulties. My assessment process is very important. Usually I say that assessment is maybe one of the most important things when we work with individuals with dyslexia. Just to say that somebody has dyslexia, it is not enough, because every child with dyslexia is different. Every child with dyslexia has different manifestations of dyslexia. And just diagnosis of dyslexia does not tell us what to do with a particular child. It is very important to have full assessment, and that assessment will lead us to appropriate approach and appropriate work with these children. Why we assess? First of all, we need to understand the obstacles to learning. The child is being assessed due to their failure to acquire reading and writing skills. If S is assumed, the teaching is not the cause, then there must be an underlying cognitive cause. The assessment process should, in principle, find that. When we do appropriate assessment, we have to evaluate, we have to find what are strengths and what are weaknesses. Not to look only into weaknesses, we also need to find strengths of a child with dyslexia and to build individual education plan to overcome the weaknesses by using their strengths. When we do assessment, we need not to find that the child has reading and writing difficulties, not to find what is with problem with their cognitive skills. It just need to tell us how to develop better ways of teaching and learning. According to assessment, we have to plan the best way of teaching in the class, but also the best way of learning during the individual session with speech language pathologist. The other reason for assessment is to categorize for provision and support. In some cases, it is possible that more resources like human, financial, and teaching resources may be made available. Assessment clearly demonstrates the need. This may be in terms of label or the underlying needs. Although this does not directly influence the assessment of needs, the assessor does need to know what criteria need to be fulfilled. And for the last reason for assessment is for self-awareness and understanding, because we know, and that's why awareness of increasing awareness of dyslexia is very important, and the diagnosis of dyslexia is very important, because it has very negative influence or self-esteem of a person of dyslexia, because they usually think that they are lazy, that they are stupid, and they just need to know that they have dyslexia, and that they are not the only one. There are a lot of famous persons with dyslexia, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, Tom Cruise, Cher, etc. And that they maybe became famous because they had dyslexia, and to know that we have methods, how to help them, how to improve their reading and writing, and to increase their self-esteem and to better understand themselves. What dyslexia assessment includes? According to definition, we could see that dyslexia is problem with reading and writing skills. It can be in accuracy, but also in speed, usually in transparent languages. The problem is with speed, and in some countries they don't calculate errors, they just measure speed of reading. In Bosnian, we need to look into accuracy, but also in speed. That's why it is very important to have appropriate assessment for Turkish. And very important thing is to include the reading words, but real words, but also reading non-words, free reading and comprehensions, spelling words and writing, but also to have full pictures. We need to look into cognitive profile and to assess phonological skills, visual spatial skills, working memory, motor skills, orientation, nonverbal intelligence, vocabulary, and rapid naming. Only when we have the full picture, we can take into consideration appropriate assessment, and only in that case we will know how to organize appropriate individual education and work with children with dyslexia. For each area under consideration, reading, spelling, phonological skills, and others, there should be section in the individual education plan that covers current level of ability in the area, target for that ability, time scale to achieve that target, who will do it, tutors, speech language therapists, parents, teachers, etc. What resources will be used and how to check the target has been achieved. We don't need to do assessment only once when child the first time comes to us. During the time we have to do assessment again and to see do we use appropriate method of our work. And now we come to my point of my presentation. When we have appropriate assessment, it will lead us to choose us appropriate methods. But it is not so easy. We could see that there are different manifestations of dyslexia. They can affect language, vocabulary, phonological skills, visual spatial skills, motor skills, etc. Therefore, we need to look into different methods and to see what really works with a particular child. When I started to work on dyslexia, I closely cooperated with Professor Angela Fawcett, a professor from United Kingdom, who really has a big experience in work with children with dyslexia. And I asked her which method is the best, and she said there is no one. You can't find only one method that works with all children. You have to consider different methods and to see what is the best for a particular child. Also on internet, in books, we can find different methods, but we don't know, is it right method? Does it really work with children with dyslexia? It is very important to look into evidence-based methods and to know, does it really work with children with dyslexia? Do we have scientific proof that it works with children with dyslexia. Therefore, I will present some of analysis and some of research that tried to see what is really evidence-based and which methods really works children with dyslexia. The dominant view on dyslexia is explained by the phonological deficit hypothesis, that is, deficit on how words are sounded out. This approach has resulted from a lot of researches that shows that dyslexics have experienced difficulties in phonological processing and have specific impairments in the representation, storage, and retrieval of speech sounds. And phonological difficulties are present in all children with dyslexia in all languages that research showed. The phonological deficit hypothesis has predominantly explained this phenomenon in the past 2 decades, but it is only just one of the several theories that try to explain the probable possible cause of dyslexia. Letter reversals and misordering of letters are more frequently observed among dyslexics than among normal readers. The phonological deficit hypothesis, however, does not explain the prevalence of such errors. Recently, interest in visual deficit and visual deficit hypothesis became very interesting, which is described to include difficulties in processing words on a page of text, and its possible causes unstable binocular fixations, and one of its effects is crowding. And what is crowding? Crowding is the negative effects of surrounding visual elements of the recognition of central subjects. It looks like this. The degree of crowding depends on the characteristics of the stimulus, such as distance between visual elements. Different studies showed that present crowding relating deficit in dyslexia, and that increased spacing has been shown to reduce crowding and improve the reading performance of dyslexic. Studies of words presented with increased interletter spacing or with default settings were conducted in Spanish, Italian, French, English, and in all these languages, results showed that we just need to increase interletter spacing, space between letters, and the children with dyslexia will read more fluently, will read with less errors, and their speed will improve. Also, there is a special font for children with dyslexia. This font is called dyslexia font. It looks like this, and Laura designed these letters. Dyslexia is special font developed to help improve the reading abilities of dyslexics. This font has special letter shapes different with the base of the letters looking heavier to prevent them from turning around because dyslexics tend to rotate or reverse letters. This font also has relatively large spacing setting comparing with standard fonts. This font, and there are a lot of other fonts specifically designed for children with dyslexia, which you can find on the internet, and most of them are freely available. But researchers wanted to know, is it really good font for children with dyslexia? If this author wanted to design something for some font for children with dyslexia, we need to have scientific proof is it really works with them. Therefore, they made 4 conditions. One, the first one is this is dyslexia font. The other one, it is a font with Arial letters. And the last 2 conditions are with Arial letters, but with increased interletter spacing. And when they compare dyslexia font and Arial font without with usual interletter spacing, of course, children with dyslexia read better this dyslexia font. But when they increased interletter spacing and when they put this to be the same as dyslexia font, there was no differences in reading in dyslexic. And they conclude that it is not because of letter shape, that it is because of letter spacing, interletter spacing, and that we can use whatever we want. It doesn't matter which letters we will use, just to increase interletter spacing, and the children with dyslexia will read better. And it would be very easy if we do that. And we wanted to check, is it really true? And me and my colleagues, we did research, and we used dyslexia font. We use Times New letters, letter font with increased interletter spacing, but we also used fonts that we know that are not dyslexia friendly. We know that italic fonts are not dyslexia friendly fonts, and we know that letters with some additionals that are not straight, with some additional characteristics are not friendly for children with dyslexia. And for these 2 letters, for these 2 fonts, we increased interletter spacing and we use also Times New Letter font because it is the mostly used font. And to check what happened when they read, and we replicated the study conducted by previous authors and investigated whether dyslexics perform better when reading text in dyslexia than in Times New Roman font. And if only spacing plays a role in improving our participants' reading performance, in that case, the dyslexia and the Times New Roman interspace font will have no difference, and dyslexics will read it the same. Result of the present study indicate that dyslexics may benefit from the increased letter spacing in text. Our results showed the different influences of crowding on dyslexics and normally achieving readers. Only dyslexics benefit from increased letter spacing. There is no significant effects or bursts observed in typical readers. Therefore, we also found the same results as the previous researchers, and found that interletter spacing is very important and can improve reading so you don't need to find some specifically designed fonts for children with dyslexia. You can use fonts whatever you want. You just need to increase interletter spacing. The other research that wanted to investigate some visual aspects and some methods that deal with visual stress in children with dyslexia is this research. Reading disability, generally termed as visual stress, is related to visual disturbance that make it difficult to read text. People experience one or more of the following: words seem to blur, the letters move around, go double, or the white space glare. However, people, especially children with visual disturbance, do not always realize that others do not experience the same difficulties and therefore do not commonly report their problems. The effects of visual stress include visual discomfort, headaches, and tiredness. These symptoms lead to reduced reading duration capacity. The use of colored overlays, colored filters, was recognized in 1980 by Olive Mears, a school teacher in New Zealand. The benefits of colored overlays to improve perception of text have been well documented. In order to facilitate reading and compositioning text, manipulation of color has become recognized as a useful form of assistive technology for people with learning disability. And these authors wanted to analyze that, and they use different systems. One Harris filter system, they use different colors and for each eyes, and blue and yellow filters only. In Dyslexia Research Trust, it looks like this, matching the first. For first filters, they use different colors for each eyes, and in the next one, just yellow and blue filters. And the study designed in compared the efficiency of these two colored filter systems. Harris' theory proposes that there may be difference between the two eyes in transmitting visual information to the brain, which might cause information from one eye to arrive in the visual cortex later than from the other eyes. The simple blue or yellow filters with short assessment times and low material cost seems to be at least as more effective than individually selected Harris Foundation hues. The other method that is tried to analyze effectiveness of methods in work with children with dyslexia is this one. They use colors overlays, and analyze the reading skills. The role of colors in reading has a few decades of history, and reported the case of student with a reading deficit who was unable to recognize words printed on white paper, but was able to recognize words printed on a yellow paper. Although the theoretical debate in the causes of reading difficulties and dyslexia has given a primary role of the phonological hypothesis, as I said in the beginning, since the efficiency of the processes of phonological processing is among the best predictors of reading skills acquisition, the role of visual perceptual skills has gained attention. One of the reasons that brought the role of visual and perceptual skills in reading to attention was the observation that some dyslexic individuals are affected by perceptual dysfunctions. The idea here is that if visual stress is the result of the relation between the visual features of black ink writing on white paper, then changing this relation might result in the reduction of the symptoms associated with visual stress. And this research used colored overlays applied about written text, positively influence both reading fluency and reading speed. And it is particularly evident for those individuals affected by the so-called Mears-Arleen syndrome, who experience eye strain and visual distortion, color shape or movement illusion during the reading, and it looks like this. And despite the wide use of colored overlays, how they exert the effects has not been made clear yet. Also, according to some researchers, the results supporting the efficacy of colored overlays as tool for helping readers are at least controversial. Therefore, we can use this in work with children with dyslexia, but it cannot be the only support that we give to children with dyslexia. Also, very interesting research is about action video games. And colleagues from Italy, they did a lot of research about this. And they used action video games and tested reading, phonological, and attentional skills in children with dyslexia before and after they played action or non-action video games for 9 sessions. So they don't work with children with dyslexia on reading at all. They just gave them to play action video games. They use video game, Raymond Rabbits, and they use the games, they improve visual perception, and they found that only playing 12 hours action video games improved children's reading speed without any cost in accuracy. More so than 1 year of spontaneous reading development and more than or equal to highly demanding traditional reading treatments. Attentional skills also improved during action video game training. This attention improvement can directly translate into better reading abilities, providing a new, fast, fun remediation of dyslexia. So, action video games can improve reading in children with dyslexia. The other research is about assistive mobile application for dyslexia. In this work, it was addressed the use of assistive mobile applications for dyslexia by analyzing possible solutions, proposing a prototype of a mobile application that can be used by dyslexics and whilst giving feedback both to the dyslexic, him herself, and to the assisting technician or teacher. The implemented prototype focuses the Portuguese language and was tested with Portuguese students with ages between 10 and 12 years old. The application was implemented for Android, and the game was built around the theme of pirates, and for its implementation, authors used graphics freely available from the site free.com. The game consisted of activities related to word structures, and it is based on phonology, on the beginning of words, rhymes, sequences of letters in the words, syllabic structure of words. It looks like this, and preliminary results show that the proposed gamified set activities allow dyslexics to improve multisensory perception, constituting an added value facilitator of adaptiveness and learning. But as the results demonstrated, the use of technology was shown suitable to their needs, allowing dyslexics to achieve similar results to regular readers. However, this application or any other cannot represent a complete solution for dyslexic education. It may just be one more of the resources. There are another research about efficiency of computer-based spelling programs and a lot of good results are obtained in previous studies. And in these studies, authors aim to improve the program's effectiveness by adapting the learning program. Therefore, they expanded the framework of the learning software by employing 2 phoneme-based adjustments, which are based on the theory of phonological processing deficit And according to this theory, dyslexia is manifested in reduced phonological awareness, which in turn leads to difficulties with learning the phoneme to grapheme conversion. And they used spelling training softwares, which records words into multisensory representations comprising visual and auditory codes. And these codes represent information about letters and syllables of a word. One of example of the game of the training is presented here, that we can see that it's visual in the syllabic segmentation, that each syllable lasts 1 second, and the duration of sounds is dependent on the number of letters belonging to one syllable. The correspondence of the grapheme to the phoneme is visualized by the textual triangles between the letters. And the illustration is presented on the slide. And generally, the data showed that memory sources are supportive cognitive functions for acquiring spelling skills and for using the information cues of multimodal learning environment, and that it can be helpful for children with dyslexia, but only not. It can be the only way of support for children with dyslexia. Results showed that children with dyslexia benefit significantly from the additional phonological cue and the corresponding phoneme-based student model. Children with dyslexia improve their spelling skills to the same extent as children without dyslexia, and were able to memorize phoneme to grapheme correspondence when give the correct support and adequate. The next research is research about based per reading deprivation with children at familial risk of dyslexia, because we know that dyslexia runs into family. We can find the children that are in risk, familial risks for dyslexia, and we prevent the failure in reading and writing later in the schools. So this is about home-based intervention that focused on phoneme awareness and lateral knowledge in the year prior to formal reading instructions. Intervention included sounding sounds and jolly letters. It was home-based pre-reading program with parents and tutors. And program took 10 minutes, 5 days a week for 14 weeks. And it was focused on the letter sound correspondence and gave special attention to the articulation of the speech sounds, and included 2 speech sounds a week. What they did, how training was organized. Every speech sound and the corresponding letter were introduced in several ways. First, a rhyme or song was read to the child with focus on the speech sound. Then the child was shown a picture of the letter while the parent produced the corresponding speech sound. If possible, the child also received a semantic cue. Afterwards, the parent and the child wrote down the letter several times on the slate. Together, they thought of people they knew whose name started with a sound, followed by an articulation exercise with attention to rounding, place of articulation, and manner of articulation. The newly learned speech sounds were repeated in nursery rhymes and language games, and phoneme blending and sound identity of both initial and final sound by several language games. Results showed that the experimental group showed more progress than the control group on received letter knowledge, and a small the opposite school of phoneme Evans, but we have to point out that it is for Dutch language, and that this research should be conducted in other languages, because in this research showed that in first grade this did not result in beneficial effects for the experimental group in word reading and spelling, and it doesn't mean that it will not work in other languages. Also very used program for with dyslexia is fast for words, computer-based language intervention programs designed to improve children reading and oral language skills. The program developed from a theory that claims language and literacy learning difficulties in children may arise from impairments in rapid auditory temporal processing skills. Corollary of this theory is that neuroplasticity, appropriate training can lead to lasting improvements in underlying neural systems and concomitant improvements in children's language and reading skills. Fast for Words was launched commercially in 1997 and is now used in many schools and clinics in the USA, Canada, Australia, UK, and other countries. The programs are based on the hypothesis that oral language difficulties often arise from a rapid auditory temporal processing deficit that compromises the development of phonological representation. I would like to say that billions of dollars have been given for the research in the USA, and they wanted to get proof that phonological intervention will help children with dyslexia. Unfortunately, phonology was one of aspects that which are very important in work with children with dyslexia, but research showed that it is not the only one. Therefore, we can see that there are a lot of research that involve phonological representation and phonology. Therefore, what is a Fast for Word program? It is an evidence-based adaptive reading and language program that delivers 1 to 2 years again in the 40 to 60 hours of use for any struggling learners. Schools choose Fast for Word because our unique brain-based approach targets the root causes of reading difficulty to deliver lasting results that make better readers and lifelong learners. Who is it for? For dyslexia, struggling readers, and it is for English language learners, but it is good to know about these programs, because we can develop such programs for our languages, or we can make connection with the developer of this program and we can develop such programs for our languages. How does Fast for Word works? Each student has a personalized learning experience that starts with being placed at their level with the Fast for Words program, and they meet students' needs where they are to address their unique needs. Here you can see some of exercise, which exercise ability of a child to correctly identify speech sounds, or exercise adapt to students' performance, providing precise and efficient training optimized for students' individual needs. Students who need more time to master the skills in alphabet, for example, will spend more time with the ducks picture above, while others progress more quickly to other exercises that optimally challenge them. Also, students receive real-time corrective feedback as they read aloud from a virtual personal reading tutor. Just imagine the progress students would make if there were enough teachers to work side by side with every single student at the same time. Now it's possible. Fast forward is the only reading intervention with this powerful feature. And here is one of another example how it works with this program. But results of research showed that there is no convincing evidence that fast forward is effective in improving children's single word reading, passage reading comprehension, receptive language, or expressive language skills. So it can be useful tool in work with children with dyslexia, but as we can see that there is no evidence that it really works with children with dyslexia. Therefore, we can use it such some additional tool, but in addition to use of methods or programs that we have scientific evidence that it is really work. The other research is about multisensory and structured language instructions. Empirical evidence supports the structured systematic phonics elements common to multisensory structured language instruction. However, scientific evidence is lacking that indicates the additional of multisensory input makes a significant difference. Therefore, the body of research supporting multisensory structured language as efficiency for reading intervention is limited and often inconclusive. On the internet and in a lot of books you can find that you need to use multisensory intervention, that it really works with children with dyslexia, but this research really wanted to show is it true or not, and this research is from I think 2 years ago. Yet parents often request it as a preferred form of reading intervention, and this has led to an increase in litigation requesting multisensory instructions under the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. The purpose of this study was to investigate whether the use of simultaneous multisensory structured language instruction promoted better letter name and sound production, word reading, word spelling for second grade children with typical development or with dyslexia than structured language instruction alone. Both used interventions provided explicit systematic phonic instruction. However, the multisensory intervention also elicites simultaneous engagement of at least 2 sensory modalities: visual, auditory, and kinesthetics, tactile. And they prepared a total of 18 non-English graphemes. The graphemes were symbols drawn from ant and alphabets, letter forms developed by Gibson, and Auberge letters. The names for graphemes were randomly assigned from the set of phonemes that was in turn randomly assigned to either the structured or multisensory intervention. Graphemes and their names were unique for each participant. And the results supported structured language intervention within an Orton Gilligram-based program as effective in promoting basic literacy skills. However, simultaneous multisensory input did not provide a treatment effect above and beyond the structured language effect although we can find this information all around. And this is an important finding, as significant time is spent training instructors on the implementation of simultaneous multisensory aspects. In addition, considerable teaching time is utilized implementing simultaneous multisensory activities during lesson instructions. If multisensory features are not critical, instructor training and teaching of lessons might be easier and more efficient to implement. Other components inherent to structured language may have directly impacted treatment effects. Orton-Gilligan method is also very often used, and you can see from this research that they mentioned that the Orton-Gilligan approach is very useful, and it is language-based instruction. It is a teaching approach designed to help struggling readers. Orton-Gilligan teaches the connection between sounds and letters, and it pioneered the multisensory approach to teaching reading. But not only multisensory approach, it also includes phonology. And we can see that this program designed to help struggling readers through teaching connection between letters and sounds, and many other programs also use Orton-Gilligan ideas. Also, there is a lot of information about the Davis program, about the Davis Dyslexia Association International, and you can find a book Gift of Dyslexia, but we really don't know does it really works, and there is no research about it, although it is often talk about this approach. They use clay during the preparing of letters, but we can use that in addition to language-based approaches, because we can conclude that multisensory interventions did not provide the treatment effect better than the structured language intervention for both individuals with dyslexia and typically development individuals. Because dyslexia affects different modalities, there are also research about auditory processing interventions, and one of them is this research which used a computer program called Audilex, based on the concept of auditory structuring ability. This aims to improve readiness for reading and writing using nonverbal material, and this computer-based test in which visual patterns are meshed with their auditory equivalents has been used to diagnose and train some individuals with dyslexia, and it can be used with children from the age of 5. And this study examined whether training using nonverbal auditory visual matching task had a remedial effect on reading skills in developmental dyslexia. And they use this game pattern. Two versions of the Audilex games were used during the training period. In this game, two patterns appeared on the screen. After 2 seconds, a sound sequence was played that corresponded to one of the patterns. Participants were instructed first to look at the pattern on the computer screen and then listen to it. The player's task was to indicate which one of the patterns was played. In game 2, only one pattern was drawn on the screen, after which a corresponding sound sequence was played. The player's task was to follow the pattern. as it was being played. The player had to press the space bar when the sound corresponding to the last element on the visual pattern was being played. After correct response, the child was rewarded with a smiling face on the screen, whereas after an incorrect response, the same pattern was repeated, but the color of the rectangle changed at the moment when the sound corresponding to it was played. And showed that there was an improvement in the auditory visual matching during the training period. There were also improvement in some reading test scores, especially in reading nonsense words and reading speed. And this tasks which are taught to rely on phonological processing suggest that such reading difficulties in dyslexia may stem in part from more basic perceptual difficulties, including those required to manage the visual and auditory components of the decoding text. And for the end, I will present meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials and children and adolescents with reading disability experience significant impairment in the acquisition of reading and spelling skills, and given the emotional and academic consequences for children with persistent reading disorders, evidence-based interventions are critically needed. The present meta-analysis extracts the results of all available randomized controlled trials till 2013, and the aim was to determine the effectiveness of different treatment approaches and the impact of various factors on the efficiency of intervention. And they included 22 trials, 5 that including reading fluency trainings, 3 phonemic awareness instructions, 3 reading comprehension trainings, 29 phonics instructions, 3 auditory trainings, 2 medical treatments, and 4 colored overlays or lenses. One trial evaluated the effectiveness of sunflower therapy, and another investigated the effectiveness of specific motor consequences. And results showed that phonics instruction is the most intensively investigated treatment approach, and that it is the only approach whose effectiveness on reading and spelling performance in children and adolescents with reading disabilities is statistically confirmed. The systematic instruction of letter-sound correspondences and decoding strategies and application of these skills in reading and writing activities is the most effective method for improving literacy skills of children and adolescents with reading disabilities. Phonic instructions combines elements of reading fluency training and phonemic awareness training. Reading fluency trainings emphasize repeated words or text reading practice. The results of the present meta-analysis suggest reading fluency alone is not an effective way to enhance the reading and spelling skills of children and adolescents with reading disabilities. Phonemic awareness and reading fluency trainings alone are not sufficient to achieve substantial improvements. However, the combination of these two treatment approaches represented by phonics instructions has the potential to
Şişde Hanım, İlhan Bey, son 15 dakikamız, soruları almamız gerekiyor. Bunu hatırlatmak istedim.
I don't understand. I will finish very soon. I'm
Sorry.
Suppose that you are telling me about the time. I check my time, don't worry. I just for the end want to show what is phonic instructions, because it is the most useful and the only scientific evidence-based program. This meta-analysis did not show positive effects of colored lenses on literacy achievement, and studies that tried to enhance reading and spelling skills of children and adolescents with reading disabilities by medication showed only minor effects, and the mean effect size for reading performance did not reach statistical significance. With the possibility of side effects in mind, the risks of medication seem to outweigh its benefits. Auditory trainings intend to foster reading and spelling by focusing on the underlying causes of the poor performance. At first glance, this approach seems convenient, but the results of the present meta-analysis demonstrate that auditory trainings do not significantly improve children's reading and spelling skills. And what is phonics? It is a key method for individuals with dyslexia. Phonics involves matching the sounds of spoken language with individual letters or group of letters. For example, in English, sound K can be spelled differently. In Bosnian, ki is always ki. For example, when a child is taught the sound for the letters T, P, A, and S, they can start to build up the words tap, taps, pat, pat, set. The basic task is to learn through the letters of the alphabet and the correspondence with the sound of spoken language. And here you can see some instructions how we can teach phonics, synthetics, analytic, analogy-based phonics, phonics for spelling, embedded phonics, onset rhyme phonic instructions. Then we can learn child how to convert letters or letter combinations into sounds, and then how to blend the sound together to form recognizable words. It is synthetic phonics. Analytic phonics is children learn to analyze letter-sound relationship in previously learned words. They do not pronounce sounds in isolation. Analogy-based phonics, it means children learn to use parts of both families. They know to identify words they don't know that have similar parts. Phonics through spelling, children learn to segment words into phonemes and to make words by writing letters or phonemes. Embedded phonics, children are taught letter-sound relationship during the reading of connected text, and onset rhyme phonic instruction, children learn to identify the sound of the letter or letters before the first vowel, one syllable word, and the sound of the remaining part of the word. And for the end, conclusion, reading and writing difficulties can be improved by appropriate treatment in order to enable evidence-based instruction for children and adolescents with reading difficulties. Research should intensify the use of randomized control trials. And thank you for your attention. I give you 10 minutes if you have any questions. I know that there are a lot of informations, but I just wanted to stress out that we have a lot of different methods, that some of these methods we can find on internet, we can find in books, but that some of them are not scientific based intervention, and that we don't have any proof that it really works with children with dyslexia, and it's very important that we use evidence-based methods.
Ben bir soru sormak istiyorum. Chat'e yazmak istedim ama bir aksilik oldu. Şimdi okumaya geçişte kullandığımız yöntemlerde disleksiler için özellikle hangisini tercih etmemiz gerekiyor? Deduction or induction, yani tüme varım mı, tümden gelim mi? Hangisi disleksi için sizce en uygun yöntemdir? Hı hı. Hı hı. I can, a second. I can't. I can't translate it. I was waiting for translator, but I can't translate it. Okay, I understand. Do you want you hear me? Sorry,
because I can't
little English, little speak English, but I'm question in teaching method, which one should we choose, deduction or induction?
How do they mean? In which context do they mean? I saw that question, but I don't in teaching method while teaching children with dyslexia and or usually or with all children. What do you prefer the most?
Yes.
It is not so simple. We can say that we prefer one method or the other methods. That's why I started with the assessment. For example, in work with some children, some children have problem with phonological awareness. Therefore, we have to work with them on segmentation or synthesis or phoneme or to to help them to analyze word in the phonemes and to connect these phonemes with graphemes. But for one child. For the other child, it doesn't work. For example, the other child has a problem with working memory. And therefore, we have to work on this aspect. In another child, the problem with motor skills. That's why I started with assessment. We have to have a full assessment of child and to see what is really problem that child, and to prepare individual educational plan according to it, because we can use, I can say this method is good and used for all children, because some method works for some children and the other one with other one. That's why I presented auditory, visual based methods, language based games, action video games, and etc. Because there are a lot of different manifestation of dyslexia, and then for we have to organize our work with children according to it. But always we can use these multi-sensory methods in combination with language in a regular class. Multisensory methods in combination with language-based methods. To use auditory, visual, kinesthetic, tactile aspects, and to use it to develop phonological skills, phonological awareness, correspondence between phonemes and graphemes. And research also showed that what is good for children with dyslexia, it is good for all other children in a class. And that we can use that methods that are appropriate for children with dyslexia, and it can be helpful for all other children. If we would use these methods in our class, it would be helpful for all children, and we will decrease number of children who will struggle with reading and writing. Therefore, I can say this method is the best because there are different aspects. Different aspect is if you work in a class or if you work individually with children to overcome their difficulties. It is very complex to work with children with dyslexia, and we really need real experts who have good knowledge about dyslexia, somebody who knows to assess the child and to lead all process, to lead teachers. They need to have individual educational plan for that experts. He will say, you should do that, you should do that with these children. They they can use usual accommodations for children with dyslexia, not to ask them to write task, to give the answer orally, and to give them more time to finish this task. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Teşekkür ederiz Profesör. Evet, başka sorusu olan var mı arkadaşlar? Kıymetli katılımcılar. Kıymetli katılımcılar, çevirimiz bitti. Bu arada yeni programımıza, yeni sunumumuz yarım saat sonra başlayacak. Saat 7'de. 7'ye kadar ara veriyoruz. Ayrılmayınız. Sesiniz ve görüntünüz kapalı bekleyebilirsiniz. Teşekkür ediyorum. Evet. Herkese iyi akşamlar tekrar. Şimdi bir sunumumuz daha olacak. Hocam Jose Hernandez katılacak. Programı disleksili öğrencileri anlamak ve psikolojik destek sağlamak konusunda değerlendirme çalışmaları CEO'su. Arkadaşlar dinlemek için mutlaka alttan butondan Türkçeyi seçmeniz gerekiyor. Biraz önce sorularla ilgili bir karışıklık oldu. Karşı tarafta hocam dil seçeneğini yapmadığı için. Lütfen siz sorularınızı chat'e yazarsanız memnun olurum.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Evet.
Okay.
Teşekkürler. Thank you.
Okay. So my name is Jose Hernandez, and we're going to be discussing dyslexia, so understanding and supporting students with dyslexia. And so I want to kind of start off kind of simple at first, and then kind of go into the explanation of dyslexia, what it looks like, and then how we can support students that have dyslexia. So who am I? I am currently an educator, and I'm also a bilingual school psychologist. So my first language is Spanish. So I'm fluent in Spanish, and then I'm also fluent in English. I've been an advocate for students with disabilities for the past 10 years. Part of my work is here in Oklahoma, so in the United States. And then I also do some advocate work in other states in the US, but most of it has to do with advocating for students who have significant disabilities or significant behavioral challenges. So starting off kind of simple, I want to know who is out there. So if you don't mind typing in the chat box your name, where are you from, your occupation or career, and then one thing you would like to learn about today, just so I can get an understanding of who I am speaking to, if you don't mind. Thank you. So mostly teachers and psychologists. Okay. Okay. Okay. Okay. All right. So we have a wide range of people and experiences. That's awesome. Okay. Close the chat box. All right. So I have this here. This is by Dr. Glasser. And Dr. Glasser did a study on how well we kind of receive information as humans. So how well do we read it and understand what we are reading and be able to discuss with others? He concluded that in general, we understand or we learn 10% of what we actually read, 20% of what we actually hear, 30% of what we see, about 50% of what we hear and see, 70% of what we discuss with others, and then 80% of what we experience personally, and 95% of what we teach to someone else. And so what this really kind of tells us in a nutshell is if we just talk and we just expect them to understand what we are saying, and we never actually discuss with them, we don't make it personal, we don't allow them to teach other students or anybody else, then really they only are learning 20-ish% of what we present to them orally. If we only ask them to read and never ever do we ask them to comprehend or be able to discuss with others or be able to read with another child, then they're only understanding or learning 10% of what we read. And so in general, we want to incorporate everything we can to make this experience personal, to allow them to discuss it with other children, other adults, and be able to teach someone what they have learned. And when they're able to do that, then they're able to learn 90 to 95% of what they actually are exposed to in the classroom and other settings. And so when you take this study in a nutshell, I want to see, if you don't mind typing in the chat box, what this means to you personally. So when you read this, what does this mean to you? Mhm. Yeah, so those are all good answers or responses. So, you know, I grew up learning Spanish first, and here in the United States, and in my state specifically, Oklahoma, we don't have programs that are taught in native languages. And so, for example, if you speak any other language besides English, you're expected to be able to read and understand English only. Most of the supports they provide is for you to understand English. And so me coming into school, not understanding English, not being able to read, write, or understand what people are saying to me in English was very hard. And so I was expected to read, I was expected to respond to questions orally in English, and I struggled. And I struggled all the way through high school. Until eventually I was able to be proficient, to be able to be successful in school and be able to function and discuss with others. But it took them several years for me to become proficient in the English language. And so with time, I was able then to discuss important topics that were happening around me and be able to make it more personal. I do believe if we're able to incorporate culture and language in the classroom, students will be more successful, especially when they're coming from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And so when they come in from another country or another language, if we're able to incorporate their language and their culture into that classroom, they're going to be more successful. If we only expect them to understand English and be able to read in English and hear only in English, then they're going to struggle. And they will struggle for a long time until we start incorporating the ability for them to discuss with others, the ability for them to make it more personal and be able to teach someone else, even if it's using a different language, a different culture. So what is dyslexia? So dyslexia is a specific learning disability, and it's mainly neurobiological in origin. So it has to do mainly with the brain and how the brain understands oral language and reading. It is mainly characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition, and by poor decoding abilities. So most of the time, if not the majority of the time, students with dyslexia have a hard time blending words together to make words. And so they have a hard time being able to recognize their sight words. They have a hard time recognizing words that are common or common sight words and then in the classroom. And they also have a hard time being able to read a story. And so they're not able to decode quick enough to be able to read a story accurately. These difficulties often result in a deficit in the phonological component of language, which we'll cover what that looks like. It's often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So most of the time with children with dyslexia, IQ or cognitive ability is a big factor. And so when we do assessments for dyslexia, we have to rule out or be able to say that cognitive ability is not the main factor. Children with dyslexia almost always are cognitively aware and have strong cognitive abilities. And so when that cognitive ability is low or significantly low, it could indicate other issues. We typically only see children with dyslexia who have about an average to low average cognitive ability. It's not unexpected because we expect them to be able to perform the task, be able to problem solve and reason. Their issue mainly comes with reading. There are secondary consequences of dyslexia. It could impact their ability to comprehend the text and be able to build on their vocabulary and background knowledge. And so because they're not able to decode or read quickly and accurately, that impacts their ability to understand what they are reading. This also impacts their ability to build on their previous knowledge and then generalize or apply to other settings and or context. And so this impacts their overall schooling when reading has to do with their ability to communicate and or take assessments or do assignments. Those all are impacted. What it's not. And so there are a lot of myths, a lot of people who have these programs who say that they can fix dyslexia, that they can cure it. And when we get confused is what it is and what it's not. We know it's a reading disability. We know it's mainly a decoding disability, being able to not put words together to make sounds and or sight words. Dyslexia is not a hearing or vision issue. And so people often will say, oh, it's a tracking issue. They're not able to track the words or be able to read left to right here in the US or right to left in other countries. That's not dyslexia. Dyslexia has nothing to do with our vision. That's a separate issue. Dyslexia is also not seeing words or letters backwards. So just because you confuse a letter B as in boy and D as in dog, that does not mean you have dyslexia. But that mainly indicates is that the student is confusing two letters that are very similar and very appropriate to confuse at that age and grade level, especially under the age of 6. And so when children are seeing words and letters backwards, it's just them not being able to recognize those letters yet, and we need to teach them. It's not saying they have dyslexia. It's not saying, it's a disability automatically. There has to be, again, a decoding issue, being able to not put words together to make sounds together to make words and or recognize sight words is dyslexia. Just because you're reversing letters does not mean you have dyslexia. Dyslexia is not due to a low intelligence or low cognitive ability. Again, if we have low cognition, low IQ, low problem solving, that's mainly due to another issue besides dyslexia. It could be an intellectual disability. It could be autism. It could be due to ADHD. That has to do with a separate issue. We want students who truly have strong intelligence levels to be able to pick up these reading skills. And if they're not able to, and they have a strong cognition, then that could be due to dyslexia. If they're limited though, and they're not able to problem solve, not able to reason, that's a different issue. Dyslexia is not due to low motivation or limited effort. So it's not due to a won't do problem. And a won't do problem has to do with behavior. So it's not because they are having significant issues with motivation. That's not due to dyslexia, right? We can't say that just because they're have low motivation or they're not putting as much effort, that equals dyslexia. There's a red line on my screen. There we go. And dyslexia is not due to poor teaching. And so we know that children, especially now with COVID and the whole pandemic issue, we've run into the problem of what is it now with children struggling in schools. And so right now we have many students who are struggling to read, who are struggling to be able to function in the classroom. And it's because we've been shut down for so long here in the US that we're not able to rule out all these factors. And so when we're looking at dyslexia, we can't say it's mainly due to poor teaching or the lack of instruction. And so it can't be due to them not being serviced or being provided interventions or instruction. Dyslexia is also not rare. It's just as common as children who have learning disabilities. And in the US, it's one of the main disabilities that we serve in the classrooms. And then also dyslexia is not a condition that can be outgrown. So just because you got older does not mean you no longer have dyslexia. Dyslexia only goes away when you've been provided the appropriate interventions and are then able to close the gap in the classroom and be successful independently without any kind of support or services. So you'll always have dyslexia. It's just now you've been able to cope and be able to be successful with those interventions that you no longer need those extra supports. So we talked about how it's neurobiological in nature. There is some evidence to suggest that dyslexia is heritable. So it does or can travel in the family. So I have seen families who may have a dad who's dyslexic, and their child is most likely going to be dyslexic. Just like your learning disability, it can travel from one family member to another, especially from adult to child. We also know that dyslexia is environmental factors also play a role in dyslexia. So we know that children who are not exposed to appropriate instruction, children who are isolated, children who experience a lot of trauma could inhibit their ability to become dyslexic or cause them to become dyslexic. And so you have to think about it more as if they're never instructed, if they're never exposed to the written language or reading and be able to collaborate with others, then they're not going to be able to be successful in that classroom. And so environmental factor could impact them to become someone that has a disability in reading. When doctors look at proficient readers, they did a study on the brain, and they wanted to know what is the difference when we compare a brain from a proficient reader to someone that has dyslexia. And what they noticed was proficient readers use different parts of the brain compared to those that have dyslexia. So proficient readers activate the back of the brain. So the back of the brain has mainly to do with language, and it has memory and be able to recall information. And children who are proficient don't struggle when they're reading. The words come naturally, they're automatic, and it flows. Whereas children who have dyslexia are most likely overusing or overutilizing the left and right frontal parts of their brain. So think of like right here at the back of your brain. And what they're doing is that part of the brain is constantly activated, and because they are trying to decode the word, they're trying to make sense of the word presented to them. And so they're constantly overusing that part because they're not proficient, which causes them to struggle when they're reading. As time goes on, though, this brain profile can become normalized to some extent after intervention has been implemented. So that just means that after appropriate interventions are placed, it helps a child with dyslexia, their brain functions more proficiently, like someone that's a skilled reader. And so even though they're using a different part of the brain, with time and training and intervention, eventually that becomes normalized and they become proficient. But the key word here is intervention. And so when we don't provide interventions, then when they keep using that part of the brain, they never become proficient enough to read a story, to be able to blend words, be able to recognize those sight words. And then they just end up not being able to read as they become adults or go past high school. And so the key word is intervention. Intervention is needed for them to be able to function in school and be able to close that gap and recognize how to accurately read a story. So what are some warning signs? So preschool, usually between the ages of 3 and 5, we notice some common signs. And so research has told us, look for these signs when you're teaching. Look for these signs at home, if you have a small child, for these warning signs. So around the age of 3, 4, or 5, if a student starts to have delayed speech, so they're not really communicating, they may struggle with having a conversation, they may struggle with communicating their needs and wants, so being able to say, I want cup, or I need bathroom. If they're not able to put those small words together to make sentences, it could be an indication that they have dyslexia. Another sign is mixing up sounds and syllables in long words. And so when they read a word, if the word is cat, or if the word is cup, if they can't recognize that word and mix up the sounds and the syllables, and it doesn't make sense when they're reading those basic sight words, it could be, again, a warning sign that the child may have dyslexia. And the last thing is if they have difficulty learning numbers and alphabet. So if they can't tell you the alphabet, they can't count from 1 to 10, they struggle with this after being given interventions or given supports, then it could be due, again, to dyslexia. We typically see students who are in preschool be able to count, be able to recognize the alphabet, because at home, parents usually work on that when they're not in school yet. They'll sing songs, they'll count their numbers, they'll count shapes, and they'll count cookies and be able to recognize those basic alphabet letters. And so when a child is not able to recognize that, and we've tried to do interventions and they're still not getting it because their memory is not retaining it, it could be due to them having dyslexia. So these are warning signs. In elementary school, what we typically see is poor spelling. And so spelling as its own skill means nothing. And why I say that is if you just give a child a spelling test and you expect them to just memorize the words, and you take a list home and they study those words and then come back to school and take a spelling test, that's not really true spelling. That's memorization. Spelling is being able to recognize the sounds of a word, put them together, and then write them down. And so what's true spelling is the ability for them to kind of know which sounds go together to make the word, and then can I write that down? So when you recognize the word dog, knowing to put the D in dog, the so they may say O or A, and then G. And so being able to write that down. Now, if they're not able to do that, after, again, given supports, given interventions, and they have a hard time spelling even basic sight words, words that sound easy to spell, it could be due to them having dyslexia. If they have a hard time remembering sight words, and so if one day they're able to recognize the words the, at, and the next day they forget, that could be due to the sign of them having dyslexia. If we give them interventions and we ask them to recognize the basic sight words like the, at, and we work on those constantly, and then day in and day out, every other day, they forget, that could be due to dyslexia. Dyslexia plays a key in how we use our memory skills. And so when we have issues with memory, when we have issues to retain things in our memory, it's not recalling easily, it could be due to someone having dyslexia. And the last thing is the inability to sound out or blend words. And so we typically see students in elementary school have a hard time blending words together. So if we gave them the word cup, being able to say k, p, and blending it together to say cup. Now, when they have a hard time blending those sounds, when they have a hard time sounding out the sounds, that is a key factor and key warning sign that the child may have dyslexia. When you look at these warning signs, think of them almost like a red flag. So in your car, it's like the check engine light. So you get a light flashing in your car, indicating that something is wrong with it. And so you'll take it into the shop to see like, what's the problem? This is what that means. So we know that children who have these issues, we need to check it out. And so we have to make sure that this is not due to them not being instructed, that it's not due to them missing a lot of school, that is not due to them needing glasses or a hearing aid. So we have to be able to provide interventions, provide supports before we automatically assume every child has dyslexia. We have to be able to rule out these things to make sure that we are identifying the correct students and providing the correct supports. So what are the common areas of difficulty? So we know that children with dyslexia mainly struggle with phonological processing. So that's when you manipulate the sounds of language. So pronouncing each word. Like I said earlier, think of the word cup. So ka, up. So being able to put those words together and knowing how to segment them or blend them and pronounce each sound. That's phonological processing. Another area of difficulty is rapid naming. So how quickly, how automatic are you able to remember names and lists? So if I gave you a list of 10 numbers and asked you to rapidly name the numbers, most, if not all of you, would do okay. Children with dyslexia have an issue with being able to automatically recognize numbers and letters, and that mainly has to do with the ability to rapid name. This is mainly due to the automatic retrieval process. So when you guys read the screen, your brain is automatically recognizing these words. Whereas children with dyslexia, it takes them a little bit to process the information. And so their processing ability is a little bit delayed, and they're slower at recognizing the names and letters. Another area of difficulty is orthographic processing. So again, being able to use your memory for letters and words and identifying those words and letters. And so this is mainly due to them recognizing the letters. Are they able to recognize the alphabet? Are they able to recognize these letters and words? And so if I gave a child the word bat, being able to say, what's this letter? What's the first letter? Oh, it's B. What's the last letter? Oh, it's T. Children with dyslexia have a hard time recognizing these words and letters automatic because, again, their memory doesn't retain that information. It's not able yet to be able to get that information automatically. We know that dyslexia is not a visual acuity problem. It has nothing to do with the vision training or vision ability. And so when we recognize, here we have doctors in Oklahoma who recognize and support the theory of vision training. We typically see students who have dyslexia not succeed because we know that from research standpoint, this doesn't help children with dyslexia. And vision training is when they sit a student down or a child in a chair. And what they do is present letters on a board and they ask the child to track. So track from left to right and recognize all the patterns or shapes on the screen. And that's all they do. They never teach them to read. They don't provide any kind of reading supports or processing supports or memory supports. It's just them looking at something and then tracking it with their eyes. That has shown to not be effective. It doesn't do anything for children who have dyslexia. And so a research recently was done by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they have stated that we know that dyslexia is not a visual problem, and we should not be recommending vision training. So with dyslexia, one of the main indicators is the ability for a child to not have phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness is the ability to hear and manipulate sounds within a one-syllable word in your head. So be able to recognize those simple words and the sounds the words make. Again, if we think of the word dog, you would be able to recognize the sounds in the word dog, whereas a student with dyslexia will not be able to. They would have a hard time recognizing those sounds in words. Same with words like tag, bag, cat. Those are hard for them because they don't have the phonemic awareness. They're not able to be aware of how those sounds go together to make that word. Research has told us that phonemic awareness is essential before a child begins to read. So they have to be able to recognize sounds and syllables before we ask them to read. We know that phonics won't work if we don't have phonemic awareness. So just because we are focusing mainly on phonemic awareness, we have to make sure that we are making them successful and masters of that skill before we introduce phonics. They're not able to recognize sight words. They're not able to blend words together if they don't understand the sounds those words make. And so this is the first skill we must teach children when we're expecting them to read, is can you recognize these sounds in these words in your head? So with phonemic awareness, there's 7 essential skills. The first one is being able to count and say each sound. So when we teach children who are in pre-K kinder, or children who have a disability in reading, we ask them to first count and say each sound. So we'll say, count each sound you hear in the word bat. And so they'll say, all right, we hear b, a, t. We hear 3 sounds. So that is one of the first essential skills we can teach them, is being able to count and say each sound. We can then manipulate and add a sound. So we can say, all right, if we have the word cup and we add a different sound to the word cup, it makes this word. Or if we have the word the, and then we add another sound to the word the, it makes this word. So we're adding additional sounds to the words, and that helps them be able to recognize, oh, I'm adding sounds, I'm making a new word. We then go down to deleting a sound. And so we can say, if we delete the sound in the word they, what word does it make? And so we delete the sound ya and they, it makes the. And so they're able to kind of recognize, if I delete a sound, I only hear these 3 sounds or these 2 sounds, and be able to recognize how that word goes together to make a new word. Another key indicator is changing the sound. And so when we tell a child that you have the word man and you change m to k, it makes can. And so being able to help them be recognized changing one sound to make another sound makes a new word. And that is extremely difficult for a child who has dyslexia. So we have to be able to practice and repeat over and over and over again. If we change one sound to make a new word, what sound does that word make? Once they're able to do that, they're able to then start picking up new words, be able to recognize those sight words, be able to recognize those simple, short sentences. And then we work on to blending sounds into words. So you blend these words together, or these sounds together, what word does it make? And they're able to do that because now they know what it sounds like. We can then do rhyming. So does this word rhyme with this word? So does cup rhyme with cat? Does it? And you ask them to kind of sound out the word and recognize, and they'll say, no, it doesn't rhyme. And so then they're comparing sounds of words, of 2 different words, and be able to say, does that go together? And then once they can do that, then we can start having them rhyme words. So which word rhymes with man? Oh, there's fan, there's can. And so now they will recognize those words much quicker and be able to have the essential skills of phonemic awareness. So in your classroom, you can do this very simply. You can have them say the word orally and then say, all right, I'm going to change the sound. If I say the word tag and replace t with b, what word does it make? And I'll tell you bag. And so you're kind of orally presenting those words so that they're working on that phonemic awareness skill. And then eventually you can work on blending those sounds and then comparing the sounds. And then eventually, as time goes on, rhyming. So we know reading integrates several different systems. We integrate visual systems, phonological systems, working memory, and language. So visual system is the ability for us to decode or recognize sounding out in words. So be able to recognize the words very quickly and how they sound and decode those words to make sense of it. We also integrate a phonological component, so how quickly we can read and how accurately we can read. So as we become more proficient, we're able to have more fluency. We also integrate working memory, and this is our ability to kind of retain information in our memory to then recall it at a later time or date. And that leads to children being able to comprehend. And so when they become proficient readers, they're able to understand the meaning of text. And then reading also involves language. So we know that language is important. So how well do they communicate? How well do they use their language to have a conversation? And so when they're proficient readers, they're then able to discuss and they can have discussions. They can be able to teach other children and use that language to communicate what they have learned. So proficient readers generally have a general awareness that words have parts, whereas students with dyslexia are not very aware that words have parts. Proficient readers do. They know that if I give them a word they don't know, they're able to know that, oh, that goes together to make that word. They also are aware of sounds in words and how the words go together to make a new word. So when you're proficient, you are able to understand the printed word, the spoken word, and be able to recognize that every word can make a sound to go together to make a word. And so proficient readers are very aware of these skills. Dyslexic readers have a difficult time hearing and isolating those sounds, those phonemes. And so they're not very aware of how sounds go together to make words. They have a hard time isolating those sounds. They have a hard time with spoken language because they're very limited in how they compose those words to make those sounds to make words. And then these sounds, again, they're very limited in how they correspond to letters. So being able to recognize the letters. So these things could look like in your classroom, they could look like they don't understand the spelling words. They don't understand the decoding of those words. And other issues, they may have a hard time with handwriting and comprehension. So these are characteristics of people who have dyslexia that mainly has to do with the inability to recognize those sounds, the spoken language of those sounds, and the letters that those sounds make. So if your child or student has difficulty reading, does that automatically mean he or she has dyslexia? I would say no. Dyslexia is one of several internal reasons for why a student might not be learning how to read. And so not all students with reading disabilities have dyslexia. Okay? Not every child with a learning disability has dyslexia. So students who have issues with reading comprehension skills, so being able to comprehend what they're reading, but then the mechanical side of reading is fine. So being able to recognize those sight words, but then they're not able to make meaning of that print. That could be a different issue. And so we don't have to say that every child who struggles in reading has dyslexia. Dyslexia is very specific, and then it has to do mainly with blending of words and sounds in those words. So if they're struggling with comprehension, that's a comprehension issue. If they're struggling only with reading fluency, that's a reading fluency issue. If they're able to decode and they're able to recognize those sounds, then they most likely do not have dyslexia. And so don't just assume every child who struggles in reading has dyslexia. There has to be key indicators after interventions have been proven to be unsuccessful. Okay, so now we know what it is and what you can look for. What can we do about it? So on the education side, there's something called structured literacy. And structured literacy is very much research evidence-based instruction. And it mainly has to do with how do they recognize those words, those sounds, and those sounds to make new words. And it's taught in a way that's very explicit and very diagnostic in nature. I say that because it requires more of a multi-sensory approach. So what does that look like? So typically with structured literacy, you're constantly repeating the letters and sounds. So how many sounds do you hear in the word bat, cup, the, at, and? Then you start creating sentences and sequencing. So using what you've learned, put that in a sentence. Using what you learned, make a new word. Then we can incorporate multi-sensory activities. So being able to write words in shaving cream, being able to go outside and write words with a stick, being able to draw a word in the air, and then give them the ability to complete a graphic organizer. So having a visual cue to know this word goes together to make this word, and you have completed part of it ahead of time so that they can mainly focus on the end product. So does that go together to make this word? And so what you could do for a graphic organizer, it's very simple. So you can have cause and effect. You can have a compare and contrast visual. So compare this word to this word. You can also have just a pie chart and be able to say, you know, what does this mean? What does this word mean? So what does the word cubism mean? So middle school, high school, and be able to look at more of the vocabulary. So being able to recognize that this word means this and makes these sounds. And so you're comparing and contrasting and you're having visual cues to help them kind of understand what you're presenting to them orally. Because if you remember earlier, if we only speak and never provide any kind of supports visually, they're only getting about 10% of what you're saying. A multi-sensory approach you can also do is writing the sight words in rice. So we have classrooms here in the US that we have kind of gone away from just writing on paper. We tend to now write on rice. We may write on shaving cream. We may go outside and have the children pick up sticks and write in the dirt. We have things with water. We have all kinds of multi-sensory approach because we know that in today's world, if we don't keep the kids engaged, if they don't find it fun, if they don't find it to be mentally consuming, they're not going to retain it. With technology and social media and Nintendo and video games, children need a constant multi-sensory because they're used to that constant reinforcement when they're playing the video games or watching TV. And so our teachers are now incorporating these things to make it more fun. And this allows them to retain the information because they're able to write it in a way that's multi-sensory and it's fun and it feels different. And so then it's retained in the memory skills. And then when they're asked about it later, they're more likely to produce that and it comes more automatic. All right, and then social, emotional, psychological supports. So one of the things that we have seen is children who have dyslexia. So once they have been identified, the main key of success is making sure that child, that adult, that adolescent understands they have a disability. So in the US, we have some schools using a tool called Charting the Good Life. And what this mainly looks at is how do we focus mainly on the strengths of the child, their relationships, and the tools they have to be able to help them recognize that they understand their disability. And what we have noticed through research is that children who have an understanding that they have a disability, that they learn a little bit different, are more likely to be successful, because then they can use their tools and their resources to be able to advocate for themselves. And so we're able to kind of walk with them and understand the strengths that they have and their assets. And so we don't focus on the negative. We don't focus on that they have a disability and say, oh, you can't do that, or you can't do this because you have this. We focus on the what can you do? And if you can't do that, what can you do to support yourself? Do you have access to technology? Do you have access to a friend? Do you have access to an outside counselor, a library? What is your personal strength that we can help incorporate as you're going throughout your life? Because we know once a child has a disability, the disability never goes away. What ends up happening is they're successful with those interventions and they no longer need the supports. And so we want them to understand that they have something going on with them, but how can they use that to their advantage to be able to recognize their strengths and be able to access those resources and supports? We need to make sure we're providing constant immediate feedback and also allow them to self-score. So children, I've done this with kindergarten students, I've done this with high schoolers. And so it involves the ability for a student to self-monitor. So at the end of the lesson, at the end of the test, the quiz, the lecture, we could say, all right, at the end of this, how do you think you did? Do you understand the concept? Do you still need help? Are you comfortable doing it without any kind of help? And are you very confident? So it allows a child to be able to self-monitor, be able to know within themselves that, hey, I got this, I don't need help, I'm good. Or hey, I don't, and I don't want to embarrass myself. So I'm not going to tell you, but I'll write it on paper and I'll circle a 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then I'll give it to you. And then you as a teacher, as an educator knows, hey, they're struggling. I'm going to pull them back in a discrete fashion and work with them. We know that children with dyslexia tend to have a lower self-esteem. And so a lot of times they suffer internally. And that just means that they tend to suffer with not asking for help. So they'll keep them to themselves. They most likely will just struggle and not tell you. And so you may think that they're just being kind of quiet, kind of reserved, but really it's them constantly thinking they're not doing well and they don't want to embarrass themselves. And so with this kind of support, you're able to do it kind of in a secret fashion and be able to recognize how are they monitoring themselves and provide that support. You also want to make sure you're providing that constant feedback. So if they are doing it well, if they are understanding it, being able to say like, I love how you answered that question so quickly, or thank you for raising your hand and answering that question. And so you're providing that immediate feedback so they know as a student that, oh, I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right. They're praising me. I'm on the right track. We also want to make sure we're providing that constant positive reinforcement. So it's the verbal praise, it's the sticker, it's the high five, it's the candy, whatever it may be, to increase that given behavior. And so when we ask a child, find the grapheme that corresponds to the phoneme, so be able to say like, which one of these letters makes the sound? And once they get it, you can then reinforce and then say, way to go, you did it so fast. You can play games. You can say, all right, let's see who does it first. So you as a teacher or the student or another student can say, let's have a race. Who is the first to recognize the word cup? Or what sound does the word bat start with? And then reinforce them and say, all right, you win, congrats, you got it first. And so you're giving that constant positive reinforcement to increase their ability to then do well in the future. And they're more likely to then answer more questions and be able to feel good about themselves. So this builds up their self-esteem, it builds up their ability to be more independent. And it goes well as they become older and adults because they know that they're doing the best that they can and we're recognizing that effort. We know from research that children who have dyslexia also may have some behavioral issues or struggles. And so they may become a little disruptive. They may try to avoid tasks. And so they may run out of classrooms. They may yell. They may be aggressive. And the biggest issue we're seeing is children who have dyslexia are very frustrated. And so children who are not well aware of their emotions, so not able to self-regulate, they tend to act out and they're very verbally aggressive. They may hide under tables. They may run from the classroom. They may yell at you. And what they're trying to tell you is that they need help. And so if we're able to then establish clear expectations and roles in the classroom, we can teach them. In order to get my help, you need to do this. So they need to know that, hey, my rules in my classroom are these 3 rules. And we know by research, the rules have to be very short. Children do not care if you have a paragraph of rules. They will not read that. You have to keep it very simple, very plain, and stated in a positive manner. And so if a child is hiding under a desk and they're yelling, you could say, Johnny, are you being safe? Are you following the rule of safe? And they know, oh, safe means this. Then you can teach them. Being safe means this. If you are safe, you are sitting in your chair. And so they know the rule, you're modeling the rule, and the most important thing is you're reinforcing the rule. And so if they're following your rules, praise them and say, thank you for sitting in your chair. Thank you for raising your hand. Thank you for saying thank you. And so you're constantly reinforcing your rules, but then you as a teacher, as an educator, as a psychologist, you're modeling the rules and you're showing them, in order to get my attention, you have to raise your hand. In order for you to be able to ask for help, you need to, ask your buddy next to you. You need to use a card. And so whatever you're using in your classroom, make sure that it's explicitly taught, it's very positive, it's posted in your classroom or your setting, and you're constantly modeling and reinforcing those rules. The last thing is we have to make sure that we're giving the child multiple opportunities to respond, or OTR. And OTR is just us commenting or questioning a student to allow them to answer a question in multiple ways. And so when we ask a child or a student individually or in a group setting to answer the question, and we allow the student to give an answer in multiple ways, they are more likely to then give you more answers. And they're more likely to then be able to check if they actually understand the concept and be able to get that immediate feedback from you as an educator. When we allow them to have multiple ways to respond, it could be in verbal responses. So tell me verbally what the answer is, or write it, or have a small group discussion. When you give them those options, we then can keep track of their progress and make sure they're engaged in the lesson at all times. So we can ask the whole class, for example, give me a thumbs up if you're ready to move on, or if you think the word is correct. Give me a thumbs down if the spelling word is not correct, or it's a noun, or whatever you're asking. And what that ends up happening is you as an educator can then say, all right, these kids over here are not getting it. These kids are. At the end of the day, or at a separate time, I'm going to pull these specific students and work with them on that skill. So it gives you as an educator a check to know they're still not getting that concept, I need to reteach. And then the students that are getting it, you can move on. And so you allow the child to have multiple opportunities to respond to that question. It's not just a worksheet. It's not just orally responses. It's giving them multiple ways to understand how they're getting it. And then it gives you as an educator a chance to see which kids got it and which kids need to be retaught. And so this is very simple. So you can identify what's being taught. So what exactly are you teaching them? And then what are you going to do to engage the lesson to have them respond, that they understand the concept or still have questions. So we had teachers using whiteboards. We had teachers doing thumbs up, thumbs down. We have little exit cards. We are having verbal responses. So what all are you going to use that allows the student to respond in multiple ways? And then are you going to allow them to respond in groups or individually? And then reinforcing. Again, reinforcement is key here because we know that children with dyslexia get frustrated. And because they're not able to self-regulate as well, they then become aggressive or frustrated, or they cry, or they run out of the classroom. And so when we can then reinforce them for giving me a thumbs up, for being able to recognize the correct answer, and being able to prompt them to change their answer or their responses, or then engage in them the lesson, and in the future, they're more likely to stay where they are in your classroom and answer more questions. So here, I have a couple of resources for those of you that are educators or psychologists of great reading resources and instruction that kind of gives you an idea of how to best support the child if they do have an issue with dyslexia in the area of reading. We also have resources for families. And so families, what you could do at home as well, whether you are working with your child individually or in a group setting with other kids at home, and be able to have some lessons and activities so you can work at home with that child. And so these are resources for both a classroom setting, but also a home setting to kind of, again, have the child practice in numerous ways and numerous settings. Okay. What questions do you guys have? You're welcome to type it in the chat box. I'll give us till 11:07 to see if anyone has questions, and if not, we will end the session.
Kıymetli katılımcılar, sevgili hocalarım, Jose'ye sorularınız var ise alalım. Tercümanlarımız çevirecektir veyahut da chat'e yazarsanız çok memnun olurum.
Yes. Can you tell me what this first comment says in the chat box? And then the one above mural. Okay, I see it. So I would say that self-esteem and self-sufficiency are very different. And so we want to make sure that we're allowing the child to answer those questions and then reinforcing them and making them feel as though they are doing it well. And then eventually, once their self-esteem has been built to a certain extent, they are then becoming self-sufficient. And so they have to be able to feel confident and be able to feel as though they're getting a question correct and be confident in how they are reading and understanding the information. to then eventually become independent and self-sufficient. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, we are officially done.
Sorularınız yok mu acaba? Jose sorularımız, sevgili katılımcılar.
Okay, you guys are.
Ben bir soru sorayım tekrar etmek adına. Sesim geliyor değil mi? Çevirebiliyorsunuz. Şimdi biz soru sorayım dedim. Takıldım ben de, sizler gibi ne soracağız diye düşünüyoruz herhalde. Sorry.
Oh, I can hear you guys.
Aha, okay. Şimdi biz öğrencilerle çalışmayı planladığımız zaman tabii onların özelliklerine göre eğitim planlıyoruz elbette ki. Sizdeki aşamalar, bu eğitim planında, bireysel eğitim planlarındaki aşamalar nelerdir? Hatta bir hocamız sordu, Oklahoma'da sanırım bulunduğunuz yerde tanılama aşaması, tanı aşamasında neler yapıyorsunuz? İlhan Bey, çevirebiliyorsunuz değil mi?
So here in the US, we have to identify students as having a disability. And so we have to do what we call an evaluation that assesses their ability to use their reason and problem solving ability and their academic skills. And then we have to compare the two. And once that is done, and then are able to develop this individual plan. So then we're able to kind of develop a plan once we diagnose a child or be able to tell them that they have a disability, and then develop a plan. In that plan, we typically focus first on the ability for them to manipulate those sounds and words. And then that plan is then revised or renewed every year. So that's very targeted on the skills that we are working on. And so the diagnosing part happens way earlier before the plan is developed.
Teşekkür ediyorum. Sağ olun. Tamam.
So I have seen research start at the age of kindergarten, so age 5, and being able to have them understand that they have a disability. And I typically will ask parents first if it's okay. So I'll say, hey, parents, are you okay with me having the child advocate for themselves and be able to recognize that they have a disability and need those supports? And if they're okay with it, I usually start introducing it at the age of 5 to have a child understand that they have access to people, resources, technology, and they have access to these things through what we call an IEP or individualized plan. So they can advocate when they do need help or do need additional supports. And so typically I do start around pretty early, around the age of 5 to 6.
İlhan Bey, bir de Aşna Hanım'ın bir sorusu var burada. Onu da çevirebilir misiniz? Tüm çocuklara bir tarama sistemi şeklinde mi, sadece sorun olan çocuklarda mı kontroller yapılıyor?
Can you say that? Okay, say that again. So we in Oklahoma and other states, we provide all these supports to all kids. And so any child that struggles, any child that shows that they are struggling with the area of reading, we screen them, given some kind of tool, and then we as educators know how to best support them. Now, after several weeks, if those interventions are not proven to be successful, then that's when we do the actual diagnostic psychological evaluation. But we typically will screen all students, provide all the supports that we can in the classroom. If those prove to be not successful, then we do the full evaluation and develop the individual plan.
Teşekkür ediyorum. Evet, başka sorusu olan var mı? Açıklamaları için çok teşekkür ediyoruz Jose Hernandez'e. Bizi bu konuda bilgilendirdi. Oralarda da neler yapıyorlar, nasıl müdahale ediyorlar, bu konuda bilgi sahibi olduk. Sanırım sorularımız da tükendi. Çünkü açıklamalar da çok da detaylı ve bilgilendirici olduğu için. Kendisine çok teşekkür ediyoruz katılımı için.
Thank you, guys. I'll see you later.
Evet sevgili katılımcılar, bugünkü programımızı bu şekilde bitirmeden evvel ben de ufacık bir şeyden bahsetmek istiyorum. Küçük kendimden bahsetmiştim. Bu arada öncelikle yarın tekrar eğitim aynı saatte başlayacak. Yine 7'den sonra yabancı hocalarımız katılacak çevirilerle. Çeviriye umarım alışmışsınızdır. Aynı saatte bekliyoruz. Ben kendimden bahsetmiştim kısaca. Sema Kumulu anlayarak hızlı okuma eğitmeniyim. Aynı zamanda eğitici eğitimi veriyorum. Disleksi öğrencilerle akıcı okumaya geçtikten sonra hızlandırma çalışmaları da yapıyorum ve bununla ilgili bir uygulama kitabım var. Değerlendirmek isterseniz çok memnun olurum. Öğrencilerle 8 haftalık müfredatı içinde olan bir uygulama kitabı, disleksik öğrencilere uygun yazı karakterleri, fontları, aralıklarla yapılmış renkli bir çalışma. Şöyle göstereyim. Hepinize çok teşekkür ediyorum. Bunun için de vakit ayırdığınız için. Gün içinde tabii ki anlayarak hızlı okuma uygulama teknikleri kitabımın ismi. Evet, beyin temelli öğrenme disleksi dostu diye de arayabilirsiniz. Satış kanalı dernekten ulaşabilirsiniz arkadaşlar. Bu arada çok teşekkür ediyorum. İmza tamam. Dernekte Yasemin Hanım'la iletişime geçerseniz ya da benimle Sema Kumlu imzalı da vermek isterim. Çok naziksiniz. Bir uygulama kitabı ama bu. Bugüne kadar olan deneyimlerimi paylaştım. Çok teşekkür ediyorum hepinize. Yarın hepinizi bekliyoruz arkadaşlar. Hepinize iyi akşamlar diliyorum. Katılımınız için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Hoşça kalın. Bu arada tercümanlarımıza teşekkür etmeyi unuttum. Çok özür diliyorum. Sizlere de çok teşekkür ediyorum katkılarınız için. Sizler ayrılana kadar ben ekranda kalacağım arkadaşlar, sevgili katılımcılar. Bugünkü programımız bitti arkadaşlar. Yarın sabah aynı saatte bekliyoruz hepinizi. Ben mi kapatayım acaba? Tekrar herkese iyi akşamlar diliyorum. Sanırım ben kapatacağım. Hoşça kalın.